pray. Amen. Okay. I could hear myself. Okay. It looks like the voice did not match with the picture. Okay. Okay, today we're on Revelation chapter 18. Chapter 17 had lots of meat in it. uh, and I wrote 5 pages of notes for that chapter. For this chapter, I have only 1 page. My notes are 1 page because some of it or half of it is a repetition of the material we covered in the previous chapter. There are some new things, but there are not many. Okay, this chapter is about the fall of Babylon. Let's start reading verses 1 and 2. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird." Okay, let's stop here. This angel announces the fall of Babylon. We said Babylon was the capital of an empire. And in the book of Revelation, it is used symbolically. Do you remember the symbolic meaning of Babylon in Revelation? What does Babylon in Revelation symbolize? Remember when we studied the last chapter, the last verse of the last chapter, we're told Babylon symbolizes a city, or Babylon is a city. Okay. For the Christians who lived during the time of John the Apostle, pagan Rome was as evil as ancient Babylon. And pagan Rome persecuted the Christians as savagely, as intensely as Babylon persecuted the people of God in Old Testament times. And in Revelation, we're told that Babylon, which symbolizes Rome, became the center of all evil. And it was the most powerful persecutor of the early Christians for 4 centuries. Okay, so we're told Babylon is fallen. The Apostle John lived between 90 and 95 AD, or 99, some people say. During his time, Rome was at its peak of power. And at that time, Rome was busy persecuting the Christians and jailing them. Pagan Rome considered the Christians to be disloyal subjects because they refused to pay homage to the emperor. Emperor worship was the religion of Rome, and the Christians said, "We acknowledge no Caesar except Jesus Christ." So the Romans branded the Christians disloyal subjects, persecuted them, and put many of them to death. Okay. So John is telling us this pagan power, pagan Rome, Babylon symbolizes pagan Rome, don't forget that, is fallen. He's announcing the fall of Rome. And when did Rome fall? About 500 years later.
Yeah, 453.
Yeah. So pagan Rome fell 500 years after this book of Revelation was written. But 500 years before the fall of Rome, the Apostle John predicted its fall. Of course, we can't say he predicted, he was shown that Rome would fall. And it happened 500 years after the book of Revelation was written. So try to put yourself in the time of the Apostle John. If you were a Christian living in 95, 99 AD, and you felt the severity of the persecution, and you chose to be loyal to Christ and refused to worship the emperor or pay homage to him, and because of your faith, you were arrested, tortured, beaten up, threatened with death, and sometimes put to death. How would you feel if you lived at that time and read in the book of Revelation that this persecuting power, this mighty empire, would fall one day? Of course, that would give you hope and inspire you to continue living in loyalty to Jesus Christ, disregarding the immediate danger, because you know that this evil empire will not last very long. It reminds me of President Ronald Reagan when he visited Berlin, West Berlin, and he saw the wall that separated East Berlin from West Berlin. He stood there and challenged Gorbachev. Gorbachev was the leader of Russia at the time, and he said, "Gorbachev, tear down that wall." And it happened. That wall came down. And here the Apostle John is telling us Rome would fall, and Rome did fall. Albeit 500 years later, but the Bible was proven to be right. Now, Rome was the center of political power, of commerce, material wealth, and fierce opposition to Christianity at that time. Let's see why it fell. Let's go to verse 3. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Now, fornication in the book of Revelation and also in the Old Testament refers to spiritual apostasy. In the Old Testament, there's a whole book, the book of Hosea, where God accuses his ancient people of committing fornication or adultery. And then he spells out what he meant by adultery or fornication. He said, "You left me, you deserted me, and went after other gods." The Israelites started worshiping Baal instead of worshiping Jehovah. And that constituted spiritual fornication, which therefore spiritual fornication in the Bible refers to apostasy. When people don't follow the teachings of God as outlined in the Bible, they're guilty of apostasy. So they are guilty of spiritual fornication. The merchants mourn over Babylon, not out of sympathy, but because they had profited from their alliance with Rome. So when Rome was a powerful empire, the merchants became wealthy through their alliance with Rome. They traded with Rome, and Rome made them wealthy. Okay, now let's go to verse 5. Now, it says Babylon, remember, Babylon is Rome, pagan Rome. Let's say pagan Rome, not to confuse it with modern Rome. Pagan Rome was guilty of spiritual fornication, was guilty of apostasy, and made the nations drunk with her wine. The wine are her teachings, the teachings of Rome, the teachings of pagan Rome. She intoxicated all the nations of the world with her false religion, false teachings. Okay, now let's go to verses 4 and 5. Give back to her as she has.
Yes, the choice that I heard was from him. For
Oh, that's okay. Then I heard another voice from heaven. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. Okay. Now, this is a call of separation. God is calling his people to come out of Babylon. In other words, come out of Rome. This doesn't mean abandon Rome physically, meaning stop your allegiance to Rome. Stop your allegiance to pagan Rome. Don't sell your soul to pagan Rome. Come out of her. Why? So that not to receive her plagues. God is going to judge pagan Rome for her sins. And if you remain in Rome, if you remained in Rome, you would receive the plagues, the divine judgments that would come from God. So God is telling his people, come out of Rome, come out of Babylon, meaning don't remain loyal to pagan Rome. That's the meaning of come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins and not receive the plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. So pagan Rome had committed many sins, elevating the emperors to the status of deity, worshiping the emperor in place of God, and worshiping other idols like Diana, the goddess Diana, which was the goddess of fertility, and persecuted the Christians. Those were her two main sins: religious apostasy and persecuting innocent Christians for their faith. Verse 6, give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she's done. Mix her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torture and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit as a queen, I am not a widow, I will never mourn. So it's time for equal payment. It's time for payback. Rome persecuted the Christians, and now she's going to pay for that sin. Double portion. This is not for personal vindictiveness, but out of loyalty to God. I mean, God is going to punish Babylon, ancient pagan Rome, not the Christians. The Christians are not taking their revenge. God will avenge his people by making sure that Babylon or pagan Rome got punished. And God tailors the punishment to fit the crime. Okay. Now she says, I'm not a widow, I am a queen. This shows her arrogance. This verse outlines the arrogance of pagan Rome. She was not cowed. She was still arrogant and boastful and very proud of herself. Although her soldiers had died on the battlefields, she says, I'm not a widow, I'm not going to mourn. I am still queen. Verse 8, therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. So she won't be able to escape divine judgment. In a short time, we're told she would be punished by famine, and the famine would cause death. Death would cause mourning, and so she would be punished by famine, mourning, and death for her arrogance. Verse 9, when the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, woe, woe, great city, O Babylon, city of power. In 1 hour your doom has come. So the merchants will lament the destruction of Rome, but they will not come to her rescue. The kings of the earth will stand at a distance, watch her burn, watch her being destroyed by the judgments of God, but they will not lift a finger to rescue her. When it says she has committed adultery with the kings of the earth, meaning that she had persuaded many nations to adopt her false religion and her pagan customs. The year AD 69 is important in the history of Rome because in that year, Rome had 4 emperors. Can you imagine 4 emperors ruled Rome in 1 year? Within the span of 1 year, Rome had 4 emperors. One of them was Vitellius, who was emperor for only 8 months. He reigned from April 15 to December 22 in the year AD 69. Now, what does this tell you? Rome used to be a stable empire. An emperor ruled for 20 years, 30 years, 15 years. But in AD 69, within the span of 1 year, Rome had 4 emperors. Now, Vitellius was one of those 4 emperors who ruled for only 8 months. He says the Romans loved delicacies such as peacock's brains. They killed peacocks in order to eat their brains. And another delicacy was nightingales' tongues. Imagine killing those beautiful birds to eat their tongues. How many they had to kill to have enough tongues to satisfy the taste of several people. This is in the Middle East today, there are people who eat the tongues of sheep and cows. That's a delicacy in the Middle East. They go and buy the tongue of a cow or the tongue of a sheep, and then they add spices to it. They puncture it and inject spices and bake it in the oven, and it's a delicacy. Then they slice it, and people put each slice in a pita bread as a sandwich and eat it. But these people chose exotic birds, and they used to eat the brains and the tongues of exotic birds. Anyway, the practices of ancient Rome were diverse and many. And but the reason I mentioned Vitellius is to show you how a country, an empire that used to be stable, degenerated into instability. When 4 emperors ruled the empire within 1 year, this shows us instability, political instability, social turmoil. So you can say that the handwriting was on the wall. from as early as AD 69. The moral fabric of the Roman Empire was decaying, was falling apart. I think I told you before, there's a historian called Edward Gibbons. He wrote a book entitled The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's a classic work. It's still acknowledged today as an excellent source on the history of ancient Rome. Students who go to university and want to major in history, they have to read this book. It's a must read. Now, he says, Edward Gibbons says, the Roman Empire fell because of internal moral decay. Internal moral decay. Because of this moral decline within the empire, it fell. And God reveals to John that Rome would not remain forever, it would fall. And this chapter announces the fall of Rome and its divine judgments. Okay, now, where was verse 9? Let's go to 10 and 9. When the kings of the earth, who without luxury, they saw the small bird of their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine, olive oil, of fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and bodies and souls of men. So the merchants were wailing and mourning the loss of Rome, the destruction of Rome, because they had a very lucrative trade with Rome. They sold many items. Here in verses 12 to 13, we have a list of all the goods that Rome had imported from other nations: gems, precious stones, fabrics for expensive clothes, aromatic spices, foods, animals, costly woods. The citron wood is a dark wood imported from North Africa. From it, they made the most expensive furniture. Costly ivory, precious metals, frankincense, myrrh, slaves. Now says that slaves, Rome, in the city of Rome, there were 60,000 slaves. At the time when this was written, there were 60,000 slaves within the city of Rome, which means every Roman citizen had slaves working for him. And this is the reference that she had horses, she had imported horses, carriages, and bodies and souls of men. Bodies and souls of men is a reference to slaves. So human beings were sold on the market like cattle, like precious metals, and like every other object. Terrible. Now, verses 14 through 16, they will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your riches and your splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, woe, O great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. 1 hour meaning in a short time, within a short span of time, Rome would lose, pagan Rome would lose all her wealth, all her luxury, would become destitute. We know from history that Rome was ancient Rome. The Western Roman Empire was invaded by Germanic tribes who were less civilized or uncivilized at the time. And these Germanic tribes invaded Rome and looted everything. They looted all her treasures, silver and gold and every precious thing. Their intention was not to rule over Rome. They just invaded the city, conquered it, and looted everything, then left. So, and they killed the last emperor. The last emperor was Romulus. They killed him, and that left a vacuum. Now I'm quoting Edward Gibbons in his book. He says, when the last Roman emperor was killed and the Germanic tribes looted the city and left, there was a power vacuum in Rome. At that time, the Archbishop of Rome, so until that time, we did not have a pope. There was an Archbishop of Rome. The Archbishop of Rome entered Caesar's palace. He took the purple robe off the shoulders of the slain emperor, put it around his shoulders, took the scepter of the fallen Caesar, and he sat on his throne. And that was the beginning of the papacy as an institution. So the Pope, the Archbishop of Rome, became Pope and ruler of Rome because the emperor, the last emperor, had been slain by the invaders. There was a power vacuum, and the Archbishop of Rome came in, assumed all the powers of the fallen Caesar, and established the papacy as an institution. So the claim of the Roman Catholic Church that Peter was their first pope just does not jive with history. It can be demolished by historical facts. Okay, let's go to verses 17 and 19. Every sea captain and all who traveled by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea, will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on her, on their heads, and with weeping and mourning cry out, woe, 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 great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour, she's been brought to ruin. So the destruction of pagan Rome will adversely affect the shipping industry. Sailors, the owners of merchant ships, would lose revenue by the fall of Rome. And they would mourn over the destruction of the city. Notice the kings mourn the loss, the merchants mourn the loss of pagan Rome, and then the sailors do. These people express their sorrow over the destruction of Rome, not out of love, but because they had derived many benefits from their trade with Rome. So Rome was the source of their wealth, and with Rome gone, their wealth was also affected. So that's why they mourn. And they kind of explain disbelief. This great city, they used to think it impregnable. Now it's fallen. Her judgments came in an hour, meaning it was destroyed within a short period of time, and her smoke was smoldering. After the destruction, the city was burned, the smoke was smoldering. Now, verse 20 tells us there were some people who will rejoice. Who will rejoice? Verse 20, rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints and apostles and prophets. God has judged her for the way she treated you. So notice the kings of the earth, the merchants, um, the sailors, all these people mourn the loss of Rome, but heaven is rejoicing. The Christians are rejoicing. Why? Because pagan Rome was the one that persecuted the Christians, and now she's dealt with. God dealt with her, gave her her just punishment. So those Christians who had been put to death by pagan Rome were avenged. Their blood was avenged. So they rejoice because their righteous cause had a just resolution. Their tormentor was tormented. Their persecutor was punished. So notice, some people mourn, others rejoice. Verse 21, then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, with such violence, the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. A millstone is a huge stone, right? You remember what Jesus says, if someone offends another person, that person should tie a millstone around his neck and throw himself into the sea. When you throw a millstone into the sea, what happens? It goes down to the bottom because it's heavy. It does not float. When you throw a millstone into the sea, it doesn't float. It goes to the bottom because it's heavy. It's too heavy. So with a millstone thrown into the sea, the angel who gave this prophecy to John is saying, Babylon is gone. Rome is destroyed. It vanished. Rome is not going to recover. Rome is not going to resurface. So the judgments of Rome, pagan Rome, when I say Rome, I mean pagan Rome. So Babylon symbolizes pagan Rome. John is predicting the destruction of pagan Rome, and it happened 450 years later or 500 years later. And so the throwing of the millstone into the sea symbolizes the disappearance of Rome from the stage of world history. Okay. Verse 22, the music of harpists and musicians, the flute players, the trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No workman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's great men. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. So he's telling us the destruction of Rome would be complete, and Rome, pagan Rome, would cease to exist, and it would be void of all human activities. There'll be no musicians playing any music. There'll be no craftsmen practicing their profession. There will be no merriment. There will be no grooms, no brides, no singing, no dancing. The city would be completely destroyed. Verse 23, In her was found the blood of prophets and of the saints and of all who've been killed on the earth. So why is pagan Rome destroyed? Because she was guilty of persecuting God's people. She killed many innocent people, or she was responsible for the death of many innocent people. So she received her just punishment. Now, we said pagan Rome was gone in the 5th century AD. Who replaced pagan Rome? I just told you what Professor Edward Gibbon says. The papacy replaced ancient pagan Rome. So in a sense, the papacy is the continuation of ancient Rome, but it's a separate institution. We can't say that we can't say that the pagan Roman Empire is continuing through the papacy. That's wrong. That's a wrong statement. The ancient pagan Roman Empire was completely destroyed. The papacy is the power that usurped the turmoil that came about at the destruction of pagan Rome. And the papacy tried to assume all the privileges, all the power that the Roman emperors, ancient Roman emperors had. Now, of course, the papacy has been reformed as an institution. I remember when I was a child, whenever the Pope went someplace, he sat in a chair and he was carried on the shoulders of people. It was, I believe, John Paul I who put an end to that. He said he refused to sit in a chair and he refused to be born on the shoulders of people, to be carried on the shoulders of people. So until that time, whenever the popes went someplace, they sat in a chair and that chair was carried on the shoulders of people. In the Middle Ages, popes were more powerful than the kings. The kings of Western Europe were crowned by the popes. So kings and queens of Europe were crowned by the popes. There's a story of one German emperor who did not obey the Pope. This was in the 12th century. And then he knew that he could lose his kingdom because of his disobedience to the Pope. So he went to Rome and begged for forgiveness. He went to the Pope's residence, and the Pope did not open the door for him. It was winter time, it was snowing, left him freeze out in the cold for 7-8 hours before he accepted his apology and forgave him. So the popes were that powerful. They had more power than the kings. In medieval Europe, the popes ruled supreme. Now, of course, they lost their papal states. Mussolini was the one who took the papal states from the hands of the papacy and reduced their rule over the tiny city of the Vatican. Now they only rule over Vatican, which is a small place. But before, they ruled over many states. The temporal power has been lost since Mussolini's time. So now the papacy is a different institution. It doesn't really resemble the papacy that existed during the Middle Ages. Anyway, but this was the study for today. Remember, in the book of Revelation, Babylon symbolizes the ancient pagan Roman Empire. And the book of Revelation prophesied its destruction and its complete destruction. And it happened that way.
But Veli, what does it have to do with us? If it's not gonna happen in the near future, but in Rome they are singing, everything is okay.
Well,
completely, and the Pope he's going, what is it? The Pope is going, and he's not approving of the Bible. He's having another book. Maybe one day because of the slavery and everything, they're gonna get rid of the Bible also. And he's going, and where is it? They are still.
I've met many Roman Catholics here in this country. And they tell me they don't obey the Pope. They don't. They disparage the Pope. They say he's a communist, he's a socialist. We don't listen to him, we don't obey him. His decrees, whatever decree he issues, they disregard because they don't believe in him. But they're still members of the Roman Catholic Church. They're loyal to the church, but disloyal to the Pope. Anyway, in the future, the papacy may change its format. I don't know. If it becomes a persecuting power, if it's as if the papacy assumes its temporal powers and starts imposing their dogmas and beliefs on everyone, like they did during the time of the Inquisition, then that's a different story.
Didn't the Catholic Church, didn't they kill how many Christians did they kill? How many Protestant people they killed? The Catholics, how many Protestant they killed? How many, you know? How
but
many?
Also, let's not also, yet not, let's be fair, when you study history, Martin Luther, encouraged his followers to take up arms and kill off the Catholics. Of course, this was in reaction to the Catholics persecuting the Protestants. But the papacy instituted the order of the Jesuits for one reason. The order of the Jesuits still continues to this day. But when it was established by Ignatius of Loyola, their aim was to stop the spread of the Protestant Reformation. That was their aim. And they were able to stop it. They stopped the advance. And now the Protestants are destroying themselves. Modern historians say that the trouble with modern Protestants is that they have stopped protesting. They're not protesting anything. There was a time when the Protestants stood for something. Now they've lost their vision. Now people say, what do Protestants stand for? That's a question for each one of us to ponder. So, in other words, what I want you to say, don't associate the papacy with the ancient Roman pagan empire. They're different entities.
But people, they say, like they were saying, maybe the Pope, he is gonna be the Pope is gonna be, it's gonna start from there. He's gonna be the Antichrist and things like that.
Yes.
And then it's gonna be real destruction. That's what you were talking about.
The Pope, if the Pope decides to rule the world, impose their Roman Catholic beliefs on everyone, and to punish the nonconformists the way they did during the Inquisition time, then he would be the Antichrist, yes. But at this time, he's not the Antichrist. In a way, we can say he is one, You know, if you read the first letter of John, he says there are many antichrists in the world. There isn't just one
Yeah.
antichrist. There are many antichrists in the world. Now, who is the antichrist? Anyone who opposes the gospel.
Yeah.
Anyone who opposes the teachings of the gospel, anyone who opposes Jesus Christ is an antichrist. So if
Yeah.
we use that definition, well, if the papacy
Yes.
opposes the gospel, then it becomes then antichrist. During the Protestant Reformation, it was the antichrist. And all the religious reformers, John Huss, Zwingli, Martin Luther, Calvin, John Knox, all of these reformers labeled the Pope as the Antichrist. They called him the Antichrist because he stood in opposition to the gospel teachings, and he wanted to suppress the
Yeah.
teachings of the gospel. So he was the Antichrist. In those days, the Roman Catholic Church was opposed to the translation of the Bible into the vernacular. They were opposed to the distribution of the Bible among the lay people. They claimed that only the priests could understand and interpret the Bible, and the lay people had to go to the priests to have the Bible read to them. But now, today, they're not opposed to the translation of the Bible. They're not opposed to the distribution of the Bible. They no longer claim that people have to listen only to the priest. So, in the Middle Ages, during the time of the Protestant Reformation, the papacy was a persecuting power, and the Pope was an antichrist, one of the antichrists.
Yeah.
And
Even now he says Muslims, everybody, we're all believing God, and he's diluting. The Pope is diluting Christianity.
Since the Apostle John in his general epistle says there are many antichrists in the world, so the communism is an antichrist, communist China is an antichrist, the Soviet bloc used to be an antichrist, the papacy was an antichrist, the Islamic religion is an antichrist, especially Boko Haram and Daesh and ISIS. All these people are antichrists. Anyone who opposes the gospel is an antichrist. So an individual could be an antichrist. But the antichrist in Revelation, the one who will exercise world dominion, has not appeared yet. That one who will make the whole world subject to him, that hasn't come yet. That's still future. But the Pope could become an antichrist, as the popes were antichrist during the Middle Ages.
But Badville, I was surprised in that pagan Rome. How could they have an archbishop? The archbishop came and got the robe and got they were allowing, it seems, the archbishop to be, if they were pagan Rome, why?
Well, there was a Christian church established in Rome during apostolic time. Paul wrote the epistle to the Romans, to the Christians in Rome.
Okay.
So there were Christian communities in Rome.
Okay.
In the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th centuries. Have you visited the catacombs in Rome? The catacombs are underground hiding places where Christians, during the first 4 centuries, when at the time of intense persecution, gathered in the catacombs underground to worship God. And many of them lived in the catacombs and died and were buried in the catacombs. The catacombs are very extensive. They go for miles and miles and miles. When I visited Rome, we went only to one catacomb and were in there for half a mile only. But there are catacombs under all of ancient Rome. So Christians hid in those catacombs to avoid persecution. And their inscriptions,
But there was an archbishop.
inscriptions on the walls of the catacombs inscribed on the walls of catacombs. They say, this is where we met for worship. And they had a custom. Every time they met for worship or Bible study, they kissed one another. That was a way of saying goodbye. We may not see one another again the next time, when we meet the next time. It was a holy kiss. It was a kiss on the cheek, the holy kiss. And you remember Paul says, greet one another with a holy kiss. The persecuted Christians in Rome took that literally, and they did it that. And you read it in the catacomb inscriptions, that Christians, every time they met for worship, they kissed one another on the cheek, and they said goodbye. We may not see one another again next week or next day. So there were,
Badveli, the man doesn't kiss.
there were many Christians in Rome during the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. So there were Christians, and there were organized Christian churches. There were underground churches, but they had elders, bishops, deacons. They had officers.
But what audacity, the archbishop goes in the palace and gets the robe. That means he had power, the archbishop, back then, when the emperor was killed, you know.
Power,
He wasn't
power, but
under
then he assumed temporal power, and he made himself a Caesar. The archbishop made himself a Caesar, and that was the beginning of the papacy. And that pope was Pope Gregory the Great. He used to be the Archbishop of Rome, then he was elevated to the rank of a pope. And so the first pope was Gregory the Great, wasn't St. Peter, wasn't Apostle Peter. The Apostle Peter never assumed the title of pope. And there was no papacy during the Apostle Peter's lifetime.
Okay. They killed them. They crucified them. How 65 AD? When did they crucify Peter? 65, 70 AD? When did they crucify Peter? It was maybe
the
70
exact
AD?
date of his execution is not known, but like we know that the Apostle Paul was beheaded. He was not crucified, he was beheaded because he was a Roman citizen. Crucifixion by Roman law was reserved for non-Romans. If a Roman citizen
But Peter,
he was beheaded. So the Apostle Paul was beheaded
but
time of Nero, 65 AD. The exact date of Peter's execution is now known, but it could have happened between 65 and 70. That was the time when Christians were persecuted quite severely, and it continued through the reign of Diocletian. Diocletian ruled in the 2nd century. Emperor Diocletian persecuted Christians very severely for 10 years, but that didn't happen. The Diocletian persecutions didn't happen during the lifetime of the apostles, because Diocletian was in the 2nd century. By that time, all the apostles had died. Okay, any other questions about today's study? So the Pope of today is not the Antichrist, but could become if he opposes the gospel and persecutes the Bible-believing Christians.
I have a question, sir.
Badveli, in verses 18, 19, 20, they were referring to her. Who is her? Is it Rome or?
Yeah, her refers to Babylon.
Oh, Babylon.
Babylon is a symbol of the pagan Roman Empire.
Oh.
Okay, so in the book of Revelation, when you come across Babylon, that's a symbol of the pagan Roman Empire.
Affiliated Rome.
Had John said Rome instead of Babylon, the book of Revelation would have been confiscated and destroyed.
Oh,
But he was clever. He wrote Babylon to symbolize Rome.
wrong.
And that's how the book of Revelation survived.
Okay, thank you.
Because but the Christians who got the book of Revelation read it, they understood. They understood that the reference was to Rome. Babylon the Great, the prostitute, was Rome.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, I wish you well and safety, and hope to see you again next week, if not earlier.